we return, we're going to talk a little more about how people can identify liars and people who are trying to deceive them. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. Let's take our discussion forward and talk about how body language can give away lies and guilt. Joining us for this segment now is Mr. Marko Burazor, who's a nonverbal communication expert. He's joining us from Serbia. And we're still continuing with our guest here, Mr. Allan Pease, who is joining us from Sydney. Mr. Marko, thank you so much for joining us. Now, before you joined us, we were talking a little about how you should interpret guilt and how you shouldn't always completely rely on your gut feeling while doing so, because that can also create some misjudgment there. But give us a sense of how universal the signs of lying are and whether there is any sure-shot way of telling if a person is lying to you.
Usually, lying I recognize very easily because people tend to avoid the gaze through me, and they don't want to look you in the eye during those first 5 seconds of pronouncing those lie. Of course, we always need to be aware of situation that people are maybe nervous, they have very hard day, but for lie, I always try to see as much as possible signs, some cues which are they're nervous, they tend to move their leg, the hands are moving in those times. If they're maybe actor, they are maybe better because they're all roles, they're lies. They're more pretending in their acting to be better liars. So with them, it's a little bit harder. And then I try to catch up some vocal signs which they are not consistent with what they said before.
Right.
So usually for lie, and for me, always helpful to see if someone is scratching the nose or putting the hand across the mouth. So always something like that.
Right. Mr. Allan, I want to talk a little about the book, Why Men Lie and Why Women Cry. Unpack this for us a little, and if you could just tell us about the gender differences between nonverbal communication, especially when it comes to lying and perhaps being deceitful, and something that would be knowledgeable for our audience here.
Well, one of the interesting things that we found in that book, in researching it, was that when it comes to lying, if you ask men and women collectively everywhere, who lies the most? Do men lie more or do women lie more? Women will collectively say, well, yeah, men lie more. Men generally aren't sure of the answer, but what the research shows is that women lie roughly the same amount as men. Women think men lie more because men aren't very good at getting away with it. Women are good at reading it, men aren't good at putting it across. So it gives the illusion, if you like, that men are lying constantly, but in fact they're not. They're lying. We lie about the equal amount. What we discovered is that when it comes to lying, we lie at least once every 7 minutes. It's a social lie, not necessarily a manipulative lie to get a benefit. But if someone said, how do you like my hairstyle? Rather than saying, well, you look like a sack full of cats heading for the river, you might say, oh, look, it really looks good, it suits you. And in fact, that is a lie. And we do that to defend us, to protect the social relationship we might have with someone. But when it comes to lying, men and women lie about the same. But women collectively worldwide think men lie much more because men get caught more often because women are better at it.
So what makes women better liars and men poor liars? What is it that allow men to get caught more often?
Well, it appears to be several things. And one of the most significant is the parts of the brain that are set up in women's brains to read the emotions of other people and animals. And this appears to be an evolutionary adaptation. In other words, that your ancestors, your ancient mothers, needed to be able to look at anybody approaching where they had babies and be able to work out from the distance, will that person be friendly or aggressive? They couldn't listen to what they said because if they wait until they're too close, they might be killed. And if they couldn't do that, eventually, statistically, they would be killed. So they needed to know, will that person be my friend? Will they be my enemy? If an animal's approaching, women needed to be able to look at the animal and say, well, that animal will be friendly or aggressive. Now, that was never an issue for men. If some guy's approaching your cave, if you're not sure about him, you just hit him with the big rock or a stick. You don't go and negotiate it or hide. And that seems to be one big difference. And women have parts of the brains for decoding the body language of babies. That is it hungry, frightened, tired, injured, and in pain, that men don't seem to have the same natural ability to do that, because in evolutionary terms, we never needed to be able to figure out what's a baby feeling. When we're out hunting bison, throwing rocks at it, we're not saying, I wonder how it's feeling about all this. We just want to accurately hit it. And that appears to be the theory that works the best in terms of why women are better at reading it. It's also why most men know that lying to women to their face is not an easy thing, especially if she knows you. We tell men, don't lie to women to their face. You're better to make a phone call or SMS.
Right. And that definitely sheds a lot of light onto what the evolutionary process behind is why men act differently to women. Mr. Marko, going back to you and talking a little more about our body language and gestures, tell us about how important it is to create positive nonverbal communication skills, and what does nonverbal communication fluency mean in this regard? What is the positive standard, if there is any, to reach for people?
As my understanding, usually there are frequent statement that usually positive people has much more success in work, in interviews, in everyday life, and that then the people with negative posture, with negative body language signs. So in order to be more successful, we need to be more positive. When you want to hug someone, you cannot have a closed posture or something like that, because it's not normal to hug someone with a closed body language. So what I work also as a business consultant, and I saw a lot of things with my clients which are very powerful and rich people, that usually most of them has open posture, positive body language, and they are more perceptive to see how other people think without their saying anything to them.
Right, they're more perceptive in that regard. Mr. Allan, when we're talking about leadership styles, which one do you think works best? Because it's often assumed to be a leader, there needs to be some underlying aggression to what you're saying. That aggression depicts passion. But then on the other hand, we also hear that a leader who merges and gels with the team is better able to motivate them. What do you think works better in this regard?
Well, when you look at leadership styles, if you look at, in evolutionary terms, again, at our past generations, leadership has almost entirely been that by men. It's been a testosterone business, and it's a man in front with the flag saying, follow me or die. And that system now has pretty much died out in modern society. Now we have more of a female-type leadership role that's more acceptable. And a female role is the coach. So the leader now is the coach of all the people, makes them feel important, makes them feel special, and gets the team to run along, and the coach probably runs behind them as opposed to running in front. So that's a very female type style, which it's more popular now.
Right, but it seems like when we talk about female leaders, they get a lot of heat for their body language, especially if they're trying to adopt certain male traits within them. Let's just take Hillary Clinton, for example. She gets a lot of heat for some of the stuff she does. And Donald Trump, well, we give him a pass for almost everything here. Do you think that men and women, and this is a value judgment, but I'd like your take on it, that they should stick to some of the innate gestures, body language traits that they have? Or do you think it doesn't make sense to categorize people in that way anymore?
You know, it's interesting the way the leadership's changed. When you look at female leaders, it's a tricky thing for females in leadership, because on the one hand, you expect that as a leader to have high testosterone type behaviours, that is to be able to drive, to put home your point, to get people to follow you. At the same time, you've got to maintain the fact that you're not a pretend man, that you still are a woman. And that becomes a tricky thing to do. Whereas for men, high testosterone men who are out there saying, follow me or else, they've become a dying breed, and they've pretty much disappeared. And now we expect them to also be able to have their feminine side and to cry occasionally when necessary. And very skilled politicians will do that. I know politicians who can cry on demand when necessary to make a good point. And they're not much different to professional actors, because most senior politicians today, I find, in most places, are more like actors now than politicians. They're acting out the role of what they expect the voters to see, to vote for them. Because a politician, if they were to represent the party policy, and if they don't believe in that party policy, we're likely now to be able to see through that, because people are far more versed today in reading body language and are far more aware of it, the fact that you can read people's attitudes through communication. And so I find a lot of seminars that I do worldwide, we get a lot of politicians will come, often in cloak and dagger. They don't want to be seen to be coming to a conference like that where you're learning how to project yourself better and to be more convincing and to cry on demand, which is what a professional actor does.
Right. And Mr. Marko, on that note of politicians and talking about how the political climate is changing, how do you think and how important do you think it is for world leaders and people who are especially fighting elections to create an eccentric personality for themselves through their hand gestures or through their body language? I mean, that gets talked a lot about, and especially when it comes to populist leaders. We have Narendra Modi as an example, who is infamous for his hugs when he goes out for diplomatic missions. Now tell us, in order for images and identities to stick in people's minds, how important is it to develop a sort of body language through your gestures?
The most important people, and like in marketing, they tend to be recognizable. They need to have something which their voters will recognize them. Someone will be recognized by some handshake, like we saw Mr. Trump with handshake where he pulled his opposite side with handshake. So we have other leaders that we saw, Obama with his calm gas, with using a lot of okay, and every politician has his own way. And we have in this life, we have realities everywhere on the world, and people try to be much more eccentric in order to get more followers, more marketing, more previews, more views, everything. Everything
so what would be the marketable traits here? Like, you're talking about how they market themselves better. What would be some of the marketable traits? The more wackier, the better?
I think that's my opinion. It's not anywhere in the books. People need to be in continuous constant. If they have something, they need to be always on that level. Not today you're making the brilliant food, and tomorrow that same food don't taste at all. So if you are making lunch, every day make great lunch. If you are making impression to others, you need to be on the high level always.
Right.
Not to go too much up, not to go too much down.
Right. And Mr. Allan, I'll put my last question to you before we end the show. We're talking about political identities being created by these gestures. How much of a political personality is manufactured, and how much focus is there on body language while these politicians and these world leaders are behind the curtains?
Well, yeah, that's a good point. And if you go back, say, 30 to 40 years, the person that you would see as a leader presenting themselves in the media or on stage is more likely to be that person showing their real emotions. But now they know that they're in showbiz, as I mentioned earlier, that we vote for people that we feel confident look like they can do the job. And a good example of this was Angela Merkel in Germany. I saw her a few times in Europe when I was in conferences where she'd be opening a conference. And the first time I saw her, I noticed her behind stage when she was just elected as Chancellor of Germany. And she had notes, and she was reading her notes, and she was pacing up and down behind the curtain, clearly showing stress. And it's something I learned that I found quite surprising, that she was nervous in front of a large crowd. And if you're nervous in front of a large crowd, they're likely to pick it up and therefore not feel the confidence in you. So she developed the gesture, which is one that we talked about earlier, this thing called the steeple. It's almost like a form of praying. That occurs naturally in about 1 of 10 people. And the word that goes with this is confidence. If you're feeling confident about what you're seeing, feeling, experiencing, this is a gesture that you may see. But if you intentionally do this, if you do this right now, just put your fingers together like that and just move them back slowly like that and put a little smile on your face, suddenly you'll feel like you're confident you can get away with something sneaky. And so you have created your atmosphere, your attitude by taking the gesture. And this is what Angela Merkel did. And whenever you would see her come out, she would come out and she would intensely take a steeple, which did two things. One, it made her feel better about herself and her confidence. And importantly, when we saw her, we'd say, wow, well, here's the most powerful woman in the world. She looks like she knows what she's doing, but she overused the gesture. And in Germany, the comedians and the comics started to really give her a hard time.
Wow.
Hello, I'm Angela Merkel. Hello, how are you? And they started to take the mickey out of her, as we'd say. And so therefore she had to reduce that and replace it because she overused it and became too obvious. Whereas Donald Trump has got his double okay gesture, which in fact isn't okay. When he says, you've got to trust me and trust the system, what he's really using what's called an air pinch. That is, it's going to be perfect, absolutely perfect. But to most people, it looks like he's saying it's going to be double okay. So it's a misinterpretation by us of what he's doing. So he needs to change that. Now, I don't know who trains Donald Trump. The first year of his presidency, I'd say nobody did because he really screwed things up from a body language perspective. But he's certainly changed things now. He's giving palm-up handshakes rather than dominating on top. But he's still got the double okay gesture, which in places like Turkey and Greece is a sexual insult. It tells them that they're a rude part of your body.
Right. And this definitely reminds me of how you said, fake it till you make it. Be subtle about it there in the case of Angela Merkel. Mr. Marko, last question to you. Now, Mr. Allan showed us one of his power moves to show confidence and at least feel more confident. Is there any tricks you'd like to share with our viewers?
I like to use. I think I read in Mr. Allan's book, Barbara and Allan's book, with thumbs up, and I usually using that during my press interviews, my TV shows, because it relaxes me, and in the same way I communicate to other side that I'm controlling the situation. I will. Everything will be okay, but with thumbs up. So for me, I using steeple also sometimes, but not to be that much visible. But thumbs up, I prefer more.
Right. And thank you so much, Mr. Marko Burazor, for joining us. Thank you so much, Mr. Allan Pease, for joining us. It was a pleasure talking to you, gentlemen. Thank you for watching Indus Special. We will see you again tomorrow with more stories. Till then, goodbye and take care.